Hey, welcome to State of the Hack. I'm Nick Carr from the Advanced Practices team.
And I'm Christopher Glyer, Chief Security Architect.
And we're joined today by the core analysts and authors to the APT38 report, Nalani Frazier and Jackie O'Leary. Welcome. So yeah, we wanted to spend a little bit of time sitting with you, getting the background for how a report like this comes together. But what we always like to start with is a little bit of your background, if you wouldn't mind, like just how you got here to FireEye specifically. A lot of people like to know that story, and then what you do for the company.
Sure. Nalani Frazier. I'm the manager of the advanced analysis team here at FireEye Threat Intelligence. Been working in information security for about 10 years now, so a long time. Started out doing incident response, security operations for Department of Homeland Security. And then I came over to Mandy about 7 years ago.
Nice. I think we worked together, but we never met. So yeah.
And I'm Jackie. I'm a senior analyst on Alani's team. I've been with FireEye for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was with the FBI.
Awesome. Nice. I mean, do you guys want to get right into the report? Hopefully, people have had a chance to read some of it. But I know we had a few things we wanted to deep dive on.
Sure. So for those not familiar, APT38 is a group that we just upgraded. How long have we been tracking 38? 38's from North Korea, by the way. How long have we been tracking them?
Since 2014.
Okay. And I thought from the report was kind of interesting is like normally we break down groups into either like what we call like financial groups or like Fin1 or Fin7 or whatever, and then APT groups, which are more nation state. Like what makes this one unique in terms of 38 and how they kind of cross?
Yeah, so this is really the first time that we've seen a cybercrime group really funding a regime. So we had a lot of talks on, is this a Fin group, is this an APT group? But ultimately we decided to go with APT group because of its connections to North Korean cyber operations.
So the pieces there were that like who was behind it was the determining factor as to which way, not necessarily what their motivation was?
Yes, okay. Exactly. And also, you know, how they operated within the environment. So they're very tactical. They take their time. We've seen them operate in environments for up to 2 years before actually stealing the money.
Okay. And so for those not familiar, or with this particular group was the one responsible for many of the headlines you've heard for a lot of the SWIFT-based wire transfer, like large money cash outs from different either banks or central banks or other things.
Yeah, and I guess we have a lot of incident response experience with this group, so you guys have a lot of frontline data to work with and hands-on stuff, which is why I think the report was so detailed and so much about the malware that was used.
How long have we been working on like getting this? Like, is it like last week since the DOJ complaint? How did that work on our side?
No, so we've been tracking this group for a really long time, right? So we have our incident responders who work the front lines. They're gathering data from their engagements, and we collect that data as it comes in. And we have a separate team who actually triages that data, and they do attribution as it comes in. And then our team goes in and says, okay, are these all clusters of activity? Are they related? What's the motivation here? Can we build a better picture of the activity? And so really, we've been working on this for about 8 months now. Okay.
In terms of like upgrading from, I guess a cluster of activity or an uncategorized group that we would call it internally to like a formally named group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's definitely an after action just because some of our other teams don't have the time to dedicate to loop back around to those clusters and determine if they are related. So we're kind of working in conjunction with a lot of other teams. So as Nalani mentioned, and then also our espionage team. So we're just revisiting that activity and seeing, okay, do we think these groups are related, and how can we drill down to get more information to determine that?
So we also spoke recently with the Flare guys, with Mike Bailey and Tom Bennett, who they've analyzed a bunch of CarbonX samples, and then they had the opportunity to analyze the source code and see like how many of those assumptions were correct. So for you guys, it's kind of interesting. The DOJ thing comes out, so you're like full speed already working on upgrading this to APT38. Yeah. Was there any surprises in it, or was there anything that like felt awesome that you already kind of had, or? I mean, what did that look like?
It was majorly different in terms of like they had some access to information or that we just don't have insider visibility into.
Sure, yeah, it's definitely a visibility issue. So, the Department of Justice has visibility into things that we definitely don't have. So it was nice to see kind of the whole picture, right? So they had insight into operator activity, insight into infrastructure that was accessing some of the domains that we've been tracking for a really long time. So that really helped with the attribution piece.
And then some persona connections, obviously, that were built out in the complaint. I mean, it was also just a lengthy complaint. I think it was 179 pages. So
That's probably fun when people are asking you to write this 38 report and then this thing comes out where it's like, this is helpful, but this is a lot.
It definitely was a few days of just like digging down deep, and because there was a lot of activity discussed, and there were multiple compromises, a lot of different usernames and accounts, so it was really for us just kind of making sure we understood all of it first.
Yeah, we had multiple teams looking at this 179 complaint.
Pouring over it, and triaging it. So.
So in the report we actually talk about kind of, each country runs their cyber operations very differently, right? Some countries have like very distinct lines between like different teams, and some have more blended or in some cases confusing. Like Iran, I know there's a lot of like very confusing between the different threat actors and even moving between them from tools. I thought this one was interesting because we walked through 38 and then temperaments and the others where so maybe if you want to walk through for the audience kind of what some of the differences between the different North Korean threat actors that we track and kind of what their focuses tended to be that we're, I guess, clustering together.
Yeah, sure. I think that's been one of the major hurdles with looking at North Korean cyber operations, right? Because there's a lot of shared similarities in terms of the malware that they use. So a lot of times other operations will group that activity together, right? So a lot of other companies refer to this activity as Lazarus, right? And that
so like one umbrella, so like Lazarus would encompass all of the activity.
Right, and yeah, that term really came about around 2014 when analysts were trying to get a better picture of what are the tools and infrastructure related to Sony and the destructive attack there. But really, over time, there were malware similarities, between the different malware families, but the motivations between the different operations really diverged.
Have we seen of any of the, so we track APT38, another group we call temp.hermit, and then additional activity that is publicly attributed, I guess, to Lazarus.
Sure.
Have we seen between those three clusters them actually use the same tools, or is it just code overlaps or similarities but not the same?
Yeah, mostly it's just code overlaps.
Okay.
So pieces of the code that weren't exactly used in different malware families, or there are similarities in terms of how they structured the code, but not exactly the same code family.
Okay.
Yeah, the code families are interesting to me between like just North Koreans in general. It's like a throwback to APT1 days with building everything in-house. One of the things that I thought was cool from your presentation was hearing about like almost unnecessary code families, like taking publicly available tools and wrapping them in all of this additional, all these additional layers that really make it uniquely theirs. It's like, it helps maybe with evading detection, but then it makes it so like signature APT38 that it's an interesting trade-off, because I was just shocked again to see it like, I think there's like, what, 30 malware families, but like 24 code families in the report. It's just...
Well, it's like the polar opposite to like APT32, who uses some custom stuff, but mostly like...
They can get away with everything public, yeah.
Right, and I think that really speaks to their development resources, right? They have the time to write these really small utilities that you could just get publicly, right?
Yeah.
But no, they're really concerned with evading, detection, so they're going to make their own.
So how, obviously we've been tracking them for several years now. What are some key things that stand out to you guys in terms of how they've changed over those years in terms of either the operations or sophistication, complexity? Like what does that look like or morphed into?
Yeah, so I think one thing that really stood out to me was we first saw them in 2014, and they were targeting banks, which we know they've always done. But one thing that really stood out was they weren't necessarily attempting fraudulent transactions, and they weren't necessarily even like targeting SWIFT systems, but they were still using tools that they would use in later compromises, to compromise, to target SWIFT or to conduct fraudulent transactions. So it seemed as if around that time they were gathering information. They were mostly like reconnaissance operations, getting comfortable with being inside the compromised environment, learning different systems within banks and things like that.
Yeah.
And also just with the timing of that, as Nalani talked about with, the emergence of Lazarus in 2014, well, we're seeing APT38 going all the way back to that time. So we know that they've had that distinct mission and targeting for, a fairly long time.
One of my favorite parts from your talk was hearing about how from Chris DiGiamo, who was also with you, who responded to a lot of the activity, like watching that swift recon, how they got in and like watched who had access to which systems, and in some cases left those files around, and so the IR team came in and used those files to identify, like, to already do the swift recon, to know who to reach out to, because I guess the organizations don't always know who all's accessing Swift.
Right?
Yeah, but the attackers basically helped them identify, the attackers identified it, helped responders identify it.
And for those not familiar with Swift, it's think of it as like a messaging protocol that banks use to communicate with each other intent to send money. And the way they actually send the money is through, say, like a wire transfer, right? But the communication mechanism is through Swift. So if you can send the message, then the wire transfer occurs. So getting access to those systems is critical in a network if you want to actually then have a cash out operation, because you can then effectively initiate the rest of the downstream components by messaging to the other bank the intent of, so many people think you actually transfer money through Swift, and I just wanted to clear that up because
got it.
No, I deal with this all the time.
Yeah. So what about victimology, or like overall impact that the group had? Like, what's your feel for what we have confirmed, what you suspect, with like how successful was this team? How many places have they hit?
Yeah, so we know that just based on our data that it's at least 16 organizations in at least 11 different countries. But really, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Yeah. Because
we know based on their malware and some of the watering holes that they'd set up whitelists that basically said, okay, if you're from this bank, we'll let you download the payload that's associated with, right? But in terms
how large were those whitelists generally? Like
they
dozens
were really,
and dozens?
Yeah, they're pretty. I mean, it's definitely regions that we haven't had confirmed targeting yet, but it just shows. I mean, they're a very international group. We get a lot of questions about, are they clustered in one area, and we've definitely seen that. But I mean, they really have an international focus.
Yes, and they were like,
from those whitelists, were there any countries that they seemingly excluded or didn't target?
North Korea.
Fair.
I just didn't know if they excluded, say, like banks in like England, for example,
no,
or France,
no,
or
it's
in
very
the U.S.
geographically diverse.
Okay.
Yeah. And there were like hundreds of different banks on those lists. So.
North Korea making friends everywhere, I suppose.
Right.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah. It's. I guess the thing that seems to really separate them, or separate from a lot of things I've responded to, I've never responded to this group, is their destructive activity at the end, or their just like disregard for all the norms. So I'm curious if you guys can color some of that, like what that really looks like and how impactful that's been.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of APT activity, that's really not normal. So in terms of espionage, usually we see espionage actors go in, they'll find the information that they're looking for and quietly exit, right? So maybe they'll delete logs to cover up their tracks, but not in the sense that we see with APT38 in terms of really burning the house down, right? Yeah. So like in one example, we saw them target an organization and they knocked off 10,000 workstations and servers. They caused employee workstations to blue screen, and phone services went down, and critical systems went down, and really caused havoc throughout the network.
What do you think is the purpose? Is it mass chaos? Is it distracting from being able to attribute? Is it like counter forensics, or is it really just like chaos?
Yeah, it's a couple of different reasons. So it's definitely to impede like any later forensic investigations, but I think also it's just because they've attempted to transfer massive amounts of money, and they need as much time as possible to launder that money, and so as much time as they can buy with the destruction of those systems really helps.
And is that a new that's relatively new I guess change or shift in their tactics, right? Like they haven't necessarily always been doing the destructive portion.
Correct. Yeah.
What other kind of disruptive things have they done?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting about the group is amidst all the destruction, they're still doing kind of like evasion techniques. One interesting thing they really did, like after they transferred funds, before they deployed destructive malware, was they actually deployed a copy of Dark Comet, so like a publicly available backdoor that we've seen a million groups use.
Yeah.
And we assessed that they may just have been trying to ping AV, and so when investigators came in, they were like, "Oh, let's look at that first." I mean, it's interesting.
Or a total like half-assed deception job, like this was
like,
dark comment. All right, peace.
On a false flag here, you know. But they're balancing all those things at once, you know, which I think is super interesting for a group.
Yeah, and the command and control for that sample called out to a legitimate bank, right? So,
so they're just as many like red herrings.
Weird.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's certainly a unique set of tactics, and it's not successful. Stop all the file deletion stuff. It's bad if you're watching. But yeah, anything else you guys wanted to discuss? I mean, I thought it's such awesome content. I hope people have taken the time to look through the report and just see the massive amount of work that goes into this.
Yeah. So. I think, you know, we want to make sure that it's not just us that's doing it, right? So we have a whole team of incident responders who are bringing in the data. We have, you know, intel analysts who are sitting along all those people who are triaging the data as it comes in. And we have our espionage team that's looking at espionage events globally. And then we're just looking at, you know, kind of the entire picture. Right, so it's a team effort for sure.
Yeah, nice. Most definitely.
The a couple of things on the, I guess the indictment, at least in the criminal complaint, the individual they identified, I think they had like a joint venture in northeast China, straddling the border of China and Korea, and he was operating from there, or at least kind of crossed over between the two. So. And
they leased IP NetBlock from a Chinese company as well, right?
Yes, correct.
Huh. Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that like where they're actually operating from is interesting, and you know, but I'm sure we'll never know. But like, is China? Do they know what's going on? Are they kind of turning a blind eye? Is it? You know, I'm sure we can speculate all day, but
it's a really good political question.
But yeah, I'm sure recently, as more sanctions and other things have come on, they've probably been a little more. Apt to just kind of ignore it and
apt. Yeah. APT. Nice. Well, thank you for coming on, and hopefully we'll talk to you guys when we have APT39 or APTX. We won't reveal their name yet, but it's going to be 39.
Yeah. Thank you for
having us.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.